Welcome everyone to our fourth event of our online series. Today it's about Germany's role in realizing the human right of access to safe water. We have an international experts panel today for the first part of our meeting. And in the second part of our meeting, we will talk about German policies. So we will start with Maud Barlow. She holds the Alternative Novel Prize. She's author and activist and also chairwoman of Council of Canadians. She has supported our movement for a long time and works on the privatization of water bodies. So water is becoming a commodity, and this trend is an ongoing trend. So this situation is getting worse because water is traded like an asset and water resources are becoming scarce. More and more people are investing in water as an asset. And in the US, actually, you can also buy water futures at the
stock market.
At the stock market. So we will talk about the conditions of water as a commodity. So how is it that water is becoming more and more interesting for investors? So basically it's about private consumers against the market, against the global market. So Maud, feel free to start your presentation.
I'm Dankeschön, Jürgen, and everyone. I am so delighted to be here. First of all, I want to give a big shout out to Germany for its support of the human right to water and for its support of public water. Germany was one of the big important promoters of the UN resolution that water and sanitation are fundamental human rights. My government led the fight, I'm Canadian, against it. It was awful. So it was really important that Germany took that position. And also Germany has done really wonderful work in promoting blue communities where municipalities promise to protect water as a public trust and a human right and to phase out bottled water. And that's really wonderful groundwork of activists across Germany and the leadership of Christa Hecht, who is the Blue Communities Coordinator in Germany. So I just want to start out by saying thank you, Dankeschön, to Germany. So in talking about commodification and financialization of water, it's really important for us to start with the concept that we're hearing more and more that water is natural capital, or water is part of ecosystem services. This started with thinking with people saying, well, in a capitalist system or a market-based economy, anything that doesn't have a price on it isn't going to be considered important. So let's put a price on water. Let's put a price on nature, and that'll prove to everybody that you need to leave forests intact and take care of water systems, right? In my view, this is terribly false thinking. And back in 2001, 20 years ago, the UN actually said nature is worth 72 million American dollars. Or sorry, trillion, however they came to that, who knows, right? But the idea was to try to prove that it was valuable. But of course, the problem with that is then you're bringing nature and water into the market system. And the more you do that, the more we allow that to happen, the more governments say, well, we're going to deregulate. If the markets are taking care of it, the markets can set the terms. And that's the thing that is most disturbing. The more we see water systems and access to water being decided by private interests, the less public control we have, the less community control we have, the less democracy we have. So really it started with the privatization of water services, although there's also a good story there. We've remunicipalized well over 300 cities and towns around the world that tried privatization that have gone back. So we're really fighting in many ways, winning that one. But there's also bottled water, which we think of as just being that local source. But Nestle, for instance, is just saying it's put its whole North American operations, bottled water operations up for sale, and guess they're selling it to private equity firms. It's hard enough fighting Nestle, but at least you can name Nestle, and you can, you can boycott Nestle, but how do you name faceless investors? So this is another way in which water gets transferred into private hands. Then there's water trading, such as in Australia, where they converted the water licenses to water rights and then allowed farmers and others to sell their excess. And of course they said, well, that'll make farmers conserve. Well, it didn't. What happened was the big farm ag business came in and bought the little ones, then the investors, then the foreign investors, and it was the Wild West. The price of water went up so high that when the government tried to buy it back, they couldn't. It was too expensive. Then in the US, they also have water pollution trading, which is where you can actually trade or buy your way into being allowed to continue to pollute a local water source. Or you get a license, like a mining company or whatever, gets a 60-year license to a lake or a water body so that they can dump their waste. That's private ownership of what should be public water. And the latest Jürgen talked about, and that is that the Chicago exchange has allowed the biggest company, derivatives exchange company in the world, to open a water futures market. And this is different than the others. The others are all commodification, but this is financialization, because you're not buying water, you're buying the asset called water. So there's no cash being exchanged for actual water, which is bad enough. You are betting, you are gambling on drought. You're gambling that, and the moment it's just California, okay, well, this year is pretty good. There was some rain, but in the long-term forecast says there's going to be drought and more scarcity. So we're going to buy at this level and try to make a profit. So essentially you're betting on making a profit from the world water crisis. And that is going to haunt us. And if that ever is allowed to move as far as exchange the way Bitcoin, think about Bitcoin on the market, which is exactly the same kind of thing, the derivatives exchange and futures exchange. Individuals then can be bidding on a package that includes depleting water sources. This is deeply, deeply troubling and deeply wrong. And we have to build a movement against this. We need to go back to the basics and say that water is life. Water is a human right. Water is a public trust. Water is a public service. It must stay in democratically held hands, or we're going to find that access is, again, we're going to be fighting that access is only for those who have the money for it. The good news is that we have a very powerful water movement in the world. We have a new special rapporteur on water and sanitation at the UN, Pedro, who is absolutely into this issue and understands it and cares about it. And we are building even more collectively and more powerfully than we ever have. We can reclaim water. We must do this because we are a planet running out of clean, accessible water. And this is the human rights crisis of our time. Thank you, Dankeschön.
Thank you, Maud, for your input. So the G20 states have promised us to work on this issue, but we'll see how it will go. Because we can see that a lot of governments are actually helping water to get privatized. So let's see where it will go. Let's pass the mic to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dinesh Suna. So Dinesh, where you live, there are 2 million people approximately who don't have access to safe drinking water, especially rural areas are affected. People who live in rural areas, vulnerable people are affected. And my question to you is a big question. What can we do about the situation? How can we realize the human right of access to safe drinking water?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jürgen, and all the participants. And I also join Maud in congratulating you for organizing this very pertinent discussion. And well, I'm an Indian. And at the moment, however, I work with the World Council of Churches, and that's why I'm based here in Geneva. But if you were also referring to my back home country situation, obviously we have our red flags because of this uncontrolled the whole extractive economic growth, which is based on the fossil fuel and the extractive industries, is definitely not sustainable. And therefore, we have been witnessing the situation. First, to start back in India, it's only last year, 21 cities were predicted to run out of groundwater, like drinking water, basically. And thanks to COVID, somehow the mobility of people were restricted, and we didn't have to face that so-called 0 day. We had in a city in Chennai, one of the metropolitan city, just 1.5 years ago, had the same situation, just like Cape Town in South Africa. However, today only I was reading the news of Switzerland. And according to a climate report that the federal government of Switzerland had just published, I was a bit surprised because Switzerland was known as the water tower of Europe. And it was surprising to see that Switzerland is going to experience somehow a kind of a water stress, because at certain times it is predicted that some regions in Switzerland will become so scarce or so warm that humans will have to curb their activities and nature will suffer. And some point in time you have about 40% less water in summer. And sometimes in winter, you would have, rainy seasons, you would have so much of water that might even cause other problems. And that leads to the connection with climate change. And therefore, climate change and access of or the availability of water are so very well interconnected. Maybe at a later stage, if you have the opportunity for me to come back on that, I would be happy to bring out the nexus between climate change and water, because I think it's a general fact that even though the 2/3 of Earth is covered with water, only 0.3% of the fresh water is available in the rivers and the lakes, and most of the others, more than 70%, are frozen. And that is where the climate change can destabilize by way of melting of the glaciers and so on, where you would have untimely excessive water availability, and in other point in time, almost like a drought like a situation. So I'll stop there and come back again later.
Thank you, Dinesh, for describing the problem. Under these conditions of climate change, the exacerbated conditions of climate change, how can we make sure that people actually have access to clean drinking water? What are the demands of the World Council of Churches in order to improve that situation, improve the access to clean drinking water for the billions of people that currently do not have access?
Yes, thank you very much. That is why the question is so important, and that is why the World Council of Churches has been engaged on the whole economic and ecological justice work since the 60s, actually, much before the whole Earth Conference, and then which was later on followed by the UNFCCC related initiatives. For example, the whole Conference of Parties on Climate Change. And the World Council of Churches wants to also lead by example, because we very clearly understand that the current model of the fossil fuel dependent economy is not sustainable. The industrial agriculture, the livestock rearing, the compounded by the overconsumption and the greed, all those are exacerbating the impacts of climate change. And we have been following as a faith-based organization and also building pressure in the UNFCCC as faith-based organizations, we have had during the Paris Agreement in 2015, we raised almost about 2 million signatures from across the world and submitted to the Secretary General of UNFCCC, where we demanded that before Paris Agreement came into being, to have a kind of legally binding system where we could also be ambitious and halt the global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And because we understand the nexus between climate change and water, one thing what we do is also with our constituencies, which are member churches and faith-based organizations, have tremendous potentialities. They have properties, they have buildings, churches, and we are trying our best to somehow lead by example by divesting from fossil fuel-based economy, basically, and withdraw their monies from those investments and invest in sustainable forms of economy, for example, and making some sort of a carbon audit of all our institutions and churches. These are somehow we are trying to lead by example. Thanks to Maud, we have become a blue community ourselves. When she came and declared the World Council of Churches in 2016, a blue community, and thereby saying no to bottled water, saying no to privatization of water, and promoting public partnership and not just public-private partnership. So these are some of the initiatives leading by example that the World Council of Churches is doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dinesh. I'd like to warmly welcome Lesha Whitmer. She is a member of the steering committee of Women for Water Partnership and also active in the European Pact for Water. Lesha, in many countries, women are responsible, women are in charge of providing water for their families and managing that water. And that means if water is scarce, or becomes scarce, they are affected first. And also regarding the decisions made around water, they're not heard, their voices are not heard. They're not given a say in these decisions around water. So what does the Women for Water Partnership promote to remedy that? Thank you, that is a very good question. Thank you, Jürgen. I'd like to do that in German. I'd like to respond in German. However, if that ends up being too difficult for me, I'll switch to English, but I'll start in German. I think there are two issues that are essential here to look at. First of all, we often hear people say that women are victims. Women have a difficult time, it's hard for them, and we are supposed to help them, to support them. That is true, and that is correct, and that is a good thing. However, it's also important to understand that many women very well understand how they're experts in how to deal with water, how to manage water at the local level. And often people are not aware of that fact, that women know very well how to manage water. But many people often doubt that. So at the local level, women are really experts when it comes to their managing their lives and including water management. So they should have a say in any decision made around water. So Jürgen, if you're saying that women are not involved in decision making, if that's the case, I would suggest that people actually start listening to women and really start listening to women. That is what I would like to say first. That is what we should do first. And secondly, in response to what you said, Maud, I understand your points. At the same time, there are many private interest groups, very small private interest groups that do remarkable work on water. And if we just rubber stamp them as evil, then we're saying that these local groups are not doing a good job, and that is not true. That is not correct. There's also a huge difference. Look at the following fact: only 10% of those involved in water issues are private interest groups. 90% are public groups, basically. So I would say that our first question should be, how do we make sure that these 90%, these public parties, how can we make sure that they work more effectively, and that they're more effective, and that they do what they're supposed to do, and that they do a good job, basically, because that's often not the case. So there's room for improvement there. We have international regulation that could be helpful in this endeavor. Local authorities could use these international regulations to improve the contracts that are being made around water. If these public bodies are in doubt, many groups are trying, and there are always, efforts, or different efforts, or efforts that have a good or a bad outcome. But again, if we vilify all the small private interest groups, basically, that are active in the area of water, that cannot be helpful in the long run. So was one of my points, and the other point was that women should be listened to, because women are experts when it comes to water management at the local level. So I also understand and subscribe to what you, Maud, and Dinesh have said. At the same time, I would say that we need to talk to everyone, including the private interest groups. So we need to talk to everyone. We need to check what is necessary for each and every context and situations, and how can we improve their, according on the basis of that assessment, what's necessary to improve the situation. How can we go forward based on that assessment? So much from my side for now, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. Thank you. Yes, thank you. We might end up with a more interesting discussion if we do not agree on everything. So if there are people that do not agree. But let me first introduce Frank Heinrich. He is a member of the German Bundestag for the Christian Socialist and Christian Democratic Parliamentary Union, and he is a member of he's their representative in the Committee on Human Rights and Humanitarian Aid. So he deals with global issues as well. And Maud Barlow congratulated you on your efforts around water. However, Germany also has a huge water footprint and a huge climate footprint. And if you look at development cooperation, public-private partnerships are promoted in the context of development cooperation as well. How is there any revision when it comes to mining projects, for example, whether or not they actually are developmental to the promotion of the right to water or not? What kind of influence, what kind of impact do our development cooperation projects have on the right to water? And is there any assessment as to whether this impact is a good one or a bad one?
So, of course, I agree with Maud when I'm referring to a compliment to Germany. I think we have achieved a lot. I'm a human rights activist, and this is also the reason why I am never satisfied with the current situation, because I know that there's still a lot of issues, a lot of problems that we must solve. Yes, we have achieved a lot, but of course there is scope for more action. We need to act faster and more efficiently. So here in the Parliament, it has taken us several years to actually write a proposal, to submit a proposal that was constructive and was also pushing the government to implement concrete measures. Last year in June, for example, I think it was May or June, I spoke to some representatives of the Parliament, and we had concrete demands. However, it's still too early to draw any conclusions, because it takes such a long time for proposals to be evaluated, to be processed. And I just want you to know that it's really a long process. So when it comes to development cooperation, Germany provides a lot of funds, that is true. However, it's also about negotiations, and there are many negotiations that take a long time. And let's talk about agriculture and changes in agriculture. One sustainable development goal is that until 2030, 10 million people here in Germany will have access to clean and safe drinking water. So this is a goal that we can actually write down in a proposal. However, it's really about finding concrete measures to implement this goal. And what we do is pushing and asking the government over and over again to actually implement concrete measures. Because it's not the right way to just count how often people talk about water issues and sustainable development goals in meetings and discussions. It's just not right to just talk about it. We need concrete measures. And we know that there's still a lot to do. So, of course, I'm not content with the current situation, because I know that there's a lot of more to do, especially when it comes to agriculture, the agricultural sector, and sanitation. We need more action. So concerning drinking water, I can say that there have been improvements. However, sanitation hasn't been a topic for a long time. So people really weren't talking about sanitation a lot. And in the end, it also has to do with agriculture, because if we take a look at the water cycle, everything is connected. So I think especially when it comes to sanitation, we need to talk about it more. We need to push our government more, and we need to establish more concrete measures. So, of course, Germany has achieved a lot. However, it's also true that we have a high ecological footprint, and we also have issues regarding our management system. So I really hope that we will be able to provide good results it has been 9 months since we first demanded all of these things. So that's the current status. Okay, so we have a first question in the chat. There's someone who wants to actually read the proposal that you've submitted. Do you have a link? That is the proposal 19125. If you want to take a look and read through our proposal, you can do it by clicking on the link that was just posted in the chat. And there's one question that is addressed directly to you, Frank Heinrich. It's about the G20 states. It's about the public infrastructure for private investors. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a conference with a couple of NGOs, and the financial secretary said that there will be a roundtable of all financing ministers with all the bosses of the great investment funds, of the biggest investment funds, because they are the ones that can actually consult and advise the governments. And we are really scared that this combination of speakers, that this combination of people that will be present at the round table will have negative consequences, because it will be about commodification of water. So can you give us an update on the process in the Bundestag? How do they work, and who is advising the Bundestag? So we actually monitor all of this. We monitor the government and their activities, because they have to act on our behalf. So they have to act on behalf of the demands that we have written down in our proposal. So we expect them to listen to the things that we've put down in the proposal. And they already organized something that was called Citizens Dialogue, where citizens could participate and bring in their ideas when it comes to sanitation and drinking water. So many people participated and joined, and many people from the civic society also signed different petitions. And this is something that we've also established in the proposal. We don't want the government only to actually discuss questions regarding water supply, drinking water supply. We want everyone to get involved, especially citizens. So I hope that during the next weeks, there will be a lot of more meetings, a lot of more talks concerning this participation of all citizens, and that this proposal will be discussed a lot more during the next weeks. And yeah, this is what I hope. Thank you, Frank. So there are a lot of questions and a discussion in the chat. People have asked if the public administration is really reliable, if we should, whether or not we should involve private parties or not. So there are a few people in the chat that say we can't generalize everything, but this leads me to my next question to Maud. So Maud, what do you think about this criticism? There are people who work in public administrations, and yeah, what's your opinion? If you reject private water companies, is it always good to reject all forms of private water companies? Or are there differences? Do we have to differentiate? Yeah, just tell us what you think.
Well, I think we have to be very clear when Lesha talks about private entities. I don't know what you're talking about, Lesha. If you're talking about private service utilities, then that's something upon which we disagree, because I believe there's a role for the private sector in dealing with the water crisis, in laying infrastructure. Nobody's saying that, you know, the private sector doesn't have a role in laying pipes or in helping find alternative sources of water protection. There's a lot of good energy out there in the private sector looking at those things. When we're talking about who decides who gets access to drinking water and wastewater services, I believe deeply that this must be held in public hands. It must be a public agency, publicly controlled. Once a for-profit company, any for-profit company gets involved in a service situation, delivering water or sanitation, they have to take 10 to 15 or even 20% of the same amount of money that the public entity would use, and they have to have profit for their shareholders. And something's going to give. Either they're going to cut corners in terms of safety, or they're going to reduce the number of workers, and they're going to for sure raise the price of water. And this has happened. We have report, study after study after study that can show you this. And look at cities like Berlin. Berlin went the privatization route. It was a disaster. There was a huge referendum. The citizens were in deep opposition. They had to cancel the contract with the private operators, buy back their system, which they're going to pay for years. And then Berlin proudly became a blue community because they said, we're never going to do this again. I can tell you, if you have examples, if you see examples around the world, Paris is another one. So proud of the fact that they went from private to public and then became a blue community. This is very, very common for cities that have tried the privatization route. Does that mean that the public service always does a good job? No, of course not. And there are many places where we're dealing with government corruption, and not just in the global south, I would like to say, and inadequate funds to really deliver water publicly. But the goal has to be two things. One, the goal is clean, safe, public accessible water for everyone one day, so nobody has to be drinking bottled water. And secondly, that we have the right to good government. Just because we don't always have good government doesn't mean we don't have the right to good government. The goal isn't, okay, this government's not so great, so let's bring in a big transnational from Europe or North America and they'll run it on a for-profit system. That's not the answer. The answer is that we have to work towards real and deep citizen democracy and take our water back into public hands. But there is a place for the private sector, not in determining who has access. That's what the human right to water means.
Thank you very much, Maud. Lisha wants to add something. Lisha wants to speak in English, so I will switch to the German interpreting channel right now.
I do agree that in the end, it is the governments who have to make sure that they have good rules on access to water, affordability to water, access to water. I totally, completely agree. The thing is, that message is sent to the governments. It's not sent to the private companies. They have to abide by whatever contract they get. Having said that, I don't want water to be owned by private companies. I don't want overall extortion. I don't want any of those. But I think the message should be, we need good regulations, sound agreements, really good guidelines. And then I couldn't care less who is actually signing up to it, whether it's a public company, a private company, a local NGO, because we have loads of those, and officially they are private. So I think it's more about talking to governments, whether it's national or local, to say, do your job. Make sure that your regulation, your contracts are well informed. And if you don't know how to do that, ask everybody here on this webinar and other organizations to help you. But don't stick your head in the mud and say it's black or white, because it isn't.
Jürgen, may I respond?
Of course.
Yes, the government can set all the rules it wants, but the difference between, and I'm not talking about a local not-for-profit NGO, absolutely that's different. We have a lot of First Nations communities in Canada where local community services are running the water, and you're absolutely right. It's not a big corporation from somewhere else, and it's not the government, it's local, so that's great. But when you're talking about a for-profit corporation running water services and saying if the same rules for the public and the same rules for the private will make everything fine, that's not true, because the for-profit company has to make a profit. It has to. It's the dead hand of the market. They can't compete if they're not making money. And the only way they can make money with the same amount of money that the public service would have is to cut corners or raise prices. I've seen many examples of contracts where a company said, yes, we'll keep the water prices, the water rates here. And then a year later, they go back to the government and they say, we're not making enough money, the pipes burst here, we have to do this. And so I think it's we need to make a distinction between for-profit and not-for-profit. If water is essentially a human right, it should not be, the for-profit motive should not have any influence in deciding who gets access. And just one more quick thing, I would like to say that the commodification and financialization goes way beyond just the discussion around services, municipal services. It goes into the control of massive amounts of water. For instance, when there are land and water grabs, there's an area 3 times the size of Great Britain in Africa alone, where foreign interests literally get leases to the land and water, and they can do what they want. Latin America, Canadian mining companies are in Latin America. They buy up 99-year leases to the water sources there. They say they're going to use it, well, they're going to pollute it. That's commodification. I think we have to have a larger concept of what we're talking about when we say that bit by bit by bit, we're transferring water over to a commodities market. And it's a really dangerous, don't forget, if we had all the water ever that we thought we did, that would be fine. But you look at the charts, the demand for water is going straight up and the supply is going straight down. We have to care for it. You could only care for it if it's publicly controlled and the communities have determination about who has access to it.
Well, most of what you're saying, Maud, is okay. But be aware that the countries that have the biggest problem with supplying quality water to people are actually Canada and the United States. The scandals in Flint, Ontario, I mean, they're unbelievable. So this is not just a developing country issue. This is an issue for every country that needs to ensure that their citizens get quality water. And if a stupid municipality, apologies for the wording, don't understand that and just cut the costs, I agree with you, Mon. It's not about cost, but it's also about who is paying attention. And there is also a big role of what we usually call the duty bearers and the people who have an interest if you don't look at your own town council, what kind of decisions they're taking, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you have to take care of your own water.
So, herzlichen Dank. Ich glaube, das entwickelt sich gerade so ein bisschen ein Dialog.
Okay, so this has turned into a small dialogue. That was not the goal as for now. However, it has been clear that commodification is a very urgent topic right now. So it's about private companies and whether they should be able to profit from water or not. And if yes, how does it use this profit? So I personally believe that in the end, it is a yes or no question. Nobody says that the public administration always works well. However, I think that it is clear that people who fight against privatization of water often face problems, difficulties, negative consequences, and there are indeed a lot of concepts on how to organize water supply better. So last but not least, I want to ask Dinesh to provide his perspective, or let's say the perspective of the World Church Council.
Yep.
What do you think, Dinesh?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is always a kind of a hot topic when you name the elephant in the room. Very often we do not talk about it, but I'm glad that we have been very openly discussing this whole issue of privatization of water. I think we also at the World Council of Churches, being a blue community, very strongly believe privatization also happens at a different level. It could be like lock, stock, barrel, like that in late 80s in the United Kingdom. Or Thatcher's time, where World Bank and then the other monetary institutions pumped in billions of dollars along with other stuff to privatize the water across the globe. I think the moment a for-profit corporation is given to decide which area to cater to, what tariff to fix to, and what quality of water to deliver or provide to which community, that is a biggest problem that we would have when we privatize water. And therefore, the governments, public, must always control the water and provide hire maybe some private corporations for their IT, for their technology, for other service providers. But the moment they call the shots, the private corporations, then we end up in trouble. We have had a debate with Aquafed on this issue, which is the conglomeration of over 400 private operators. And then even though there are 400 operators, Suez and Veolia probably control half of the private corporations, the privatization of water around the world, basically. And what Lisa also quotes, that only 10% privately operation, probably more than some 300 cities have now become remunicipalized again. And that is the reason that people out of experience are coming out. Secondly, the private corporations or the private companies also enter into contracts which are 20 to 30 years long. Governments come and go, but the next government, even if oppose privatization, can't do anything because there are these contracts. I just want to give one more example, is the accountability component. Today, if a government is not able to deliver, then they are accountable. They can be voted out in the next election. But what do we do for a private corporation contracted for 30 years? I come from India, New Delhi. This new government has come. It's called the Common Man's Party. And since they came, they made water for free to everyone, a little more than the WHO recommendation of 100 liters per day per person. But if you go even 1 liter above, you pay the whole price, the fee of the water. And therefore, these kind of things only a government can do, which comes with a manifesto at the time of election and can be made accountable if they do not deliver. And therefore, I very strongly weigh on Maud's point on this one. And WCC is also very, very strongly promoting public partnership and always to have control of water services with the government. Private corporations are there for IT and other supports, but not to call the shots.
Thank you, Dinesh. I want to pick up on a question from the chat to Frank Heinrich regarding policy coherence. The German government has a lot of instruments to promote foreign economies and foreign trade. And there are projects where people actually lose the access to water. For example, a mine in Guinea, a bauxite mine in Guinea, where due to the policies, German policies, people actually lose the access to water. Was this an intention? Were people aware of that? Was the government aware of that? Or was that an unintended consequence of that project? Well, thank you for bringing that up. Wherever we have contradictions, wherever, as a committee, right, on human rights and humanitarian aid, if we see any contradictions, we raise this either, as a parliamentary group or together with other parliamentary groups as well. There are other cases that we heard about, similar cases that we heard about. But I would urge the participant who raised the issue to send me an email. So we need to be alerted about these cases. So we have to monitor the government's activities. We have to call these activities into question. This is part of what we do as a committee. So we do not only, submit proposals and table motions. We also really show. We question. The economic ministry, the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the Foreign Office in Germany, these three institutions, the supply chain law and the social ministry, they are arguing about due diligence and accountability in this supply chain legislation. And as a member of the committee, we are not happy when it comes to the legally binding nature of these provisions, and also that these provisions are actually actionable and enforceable in legal terms. This needs to be improved. That part of the law, of the proposed law. So if you alert us on these cases, then you help us in our work to raise these issues, to question the government's policies and activities. And the example that was mentioned in Guinea, the bauxite mine in Guinea, please send me an email, because I'll pass this information on. This is vital information for us, and we are going to demand answers from the government. We're not going to be silent about this and just sit back. Thank you. Thank you for that. I don't know what's going to happen, but this is because this is not only in my hands, but you can always contact your MPs, basically. So please reach out to us if you hear about these cases. So that goes to the participants. You can send Frank an email, and we would be interested in what can be achieved, or what the response would be. To wrap up our first session, basically, the first part of our session, we talked about privatization, the issue of commodification of water. And this, of course, touches a nerve with people because it affects many people. So it's an emotional issue as well. The interests of private investors to trade water as an asset, to treat water as an asset, are actually on the rise. So there are more and more private entities investing in water. Then we had arguments to the effect of not vilifying all private entities and to, for the need to differentiate. Also about the fact that public authorities are not always the best, are not always acting in the best interest of the people when it comes to water management. And of course, we see the resistance in many communities, in many cities, to actually bring about a more democratic control of water. Maud said it well, we have a right to good government. This is not yet a human right, good government, but in that sense, if we have local authorities and local government that does not work, we have to help them out and make sure that they do their job. So moving on to the next, before we move on to the next segment of our session, Maud, would you like to add something, or do you have concluding remarks for this session? You have 2 minutes. Are you with us, Maud?
I'm right here. I didn't know you were calling on me, so I was on mute. Well, I just, sorry, I want to say that it's snowing. I'm in Canada and it's snowing and we're still locked down in COVID, but this has been a year. I've written a book on hope. I've written a book called The Little Book of Hope, Lessons from a Lifetime of Activism. And I just want to end on a note of hope, because I really think that the COVID issue, the COVID crisis, has shone the spotlight on the fact that over half the population of the world doesn't have a place to wash their hands with soap and warm water. And that was the first thing we were told last year when we all learned about COVID: wash your hands, wash your hands. And if anything's good is going to come out of this, it is that there is serious aid money and government money going into sanitation services in the global south, in the global north, where migrants are living and so on. There really is an understanding now that there have to be proper sanitation services. And I think also what will come out of this is the notion and understanding that government matters. Even the International Monetary Fund is saying the private sector failed to protect supply chains, medications, protections for people around the world. Government has to step forward again. Good government, strong government that's going to do the right thing. We need public services, not just water, but healthcare, the right to have a democratic say in our lives. And I think we're going to see a sea change in the way we view nature. I think this is what I call the age of nature. And I feel very hopeful. I think that there's a change in our collective thinking around water and nature that is profoundly hopeful. So I want to thank you, Dankeschön, to everyone. Thank you for having me on.
Okay. The last,
thank you for being with us, Maud. Thank you.
Word would
Dinesh,
be very strongly believe the World Council of Churches that water is a human right. It is God's gift and it is a public good, period. And therefore, we are not open to any discussions in this. This is our 600 million followers at the World Council of Churches. That's our message we are giving. Secondly, just for the Germany, I saw it in the chat also, Germany also need to revisit its policies on agricultural imports, particularly like the nuts and the soya and other water intensive agricultural products from the global south, where they already are having a water crisis in those countries, and they still have to produce these water intensive products because we want it here in Germany. And that is one thing our partner Bread for the World in Germany has produced a study I can send the link with you all. I think Germany need to also revisit that. So with that plea, I would end. Thank you.
Ist es einfacher, das auf Englisch zu sagen?
No problem.
Dankeschön. Thank you, Jürgen. It's easier for me to do that in English, but I'll try in German.
Wir glauben, dass es
So firstly, I would like to say that we believe,
gut ist, wenn wir eine Recht
as the Women for Water Partnership, we believe that that it is good that we have the right to water and sanitation, the right to clean drinking water and sanitation. And if that right is not guaranteed or not realized, wherever that's the case, we have to make sure that we uphold this right and that we make sure that that people have access to clean drinking water and sanitation.
Resolutions can help. You have to go to your own
It's not enough to just say that UN resolutions can help.
ministry and tell them this is what we want.
Yeah.
And every country has its own solutions. So not always we might like the solution a country chooses, but that's their solution. They have the right to choose their own solution. And Herr Heinrich, I appreciate what you said, but be aware that your government is staging one of the biggest water events ever on the 1st of July this year, and trying to debate everything that we have debated today. So I would really urge you to get into contact with BMU, Thomas Stratenwert, talk to him, and make sure that some of what you want to convey is in that meeting.
Okay, that's
And
fine.
dear friends, if you have additional messages, this is chance number 1. So Jürgen, wenn du willst, wenn da Leute sind, die das auch gerne machen würde, bitte sende.
Given this is an opportunity for us to actually make sure that we convey our messages and our arguments on that conference.
Und danke für die Einladung.
So people can also send their inputs to us. Thank you, Jürgen. Frank, you have 2 minutes as well. First of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your inputs. I learned a lot. And I have been aware of what we read about in the chat, that we have to find a balance. We have to strike a balance also when it comes to water management and all issues concerning water. And thank you for encouraging me to brief my MPs prior to that conference on the 1st of July. The human right to water is a central issue that I focus on in my work as a human rights politician. In the debate, we have poor experience. We have good experience, re-municipalization in Berlin, for example. But sometimes municipalities in Germany, municipalities were acting in a way that their water management was not profitable. So the human right to water was secured. However, in terms of the business side of things, the economic side of things didn't work. So some municipalities actually did very poorly on this economic side of water management, even though the human right to water was guaranteed and was upheld. And again, alert us on these cases. So please send us direct emails and please get in touch. Thank you. And we're moving on to our second segment. And Lesha is asking a question. Sorry, Lesha, we have to move on. I'm afraid we have to move on for reasons of time. But Lesha is now saying there's a UN international meeting, and she's switching to English.
And I will go there and try and convey your messages as well. So I apologize, I can't follow the rest of your session.
Ja, schade, aber auch ein wichtiger Termin. Wir kommen jetzt zu Deutschland und Europa. Und
now we're switching our focus, and I'd like to warmly welcome Rita Schwarzelür-Sutter from the Environment Ministry. We have Steffi Lemke from the opposition, from the Green Party, and Sebastian Schönauer from the Friends of the Earth Germany in Bavaria, and he's also a steering committee member or chair of the German Forum on Environment and Development. A warm welcome to the three of you. We've invited you because we want to talk about the right to water. And in Germany, we often said, well, we have enough water. We don't have any problems around water, but the reality looks different. We have droughts and summer. We have also looming conflicts around water and water scarcity. Of course, we have major players. And Germany is also, of course, contributing to water pollution. So, what does Germany do around aquatic ecosystems, around the protection of waters and water bodies, and the protection of the right to clean water? What about this next term in office? What do you do around these issues in the government? Thank you, first of all, for the invitation. Water is a central issue for us at the Environment Ministry, as you rightly pointed out. We do not have a water stress situation at the moment. However, we also see that we had very dry summers. The last 3 summers were very dry. However, there were regional differences when it comes to the availability of water during the summer. We're still assessing what impacts that has on agriculture, water supply to the ecosystems and the water bodies and water reserves in Germany, and what are the impacts on water availability and water supply as a whole. Sometimes we have to adjust even shipping, the shipping trade, because ships can no longer be used because the water level is reduced, is too low, basically. We have a national water strategy that we are that we're working on. We have initiated a water dialogue. Many people participated in that water dialogue, and we are planning on presenting the national water strategy, which will be around how do we manage water as a resource that becomes ever scarcer. What are the measures that we have to take? What are the priorities that we have to take? How can we preserve water? How can we save water? How can we store water? And so on. There are other issues. What are the social implications and social justice implications of water? We are taking seriously the precautionary principle and are planning on implementing the measures. We will present these measures as part of the national water strategy during the summer. And of course, we appreciate any input on what kind of measures we actually need to implement a sound water strategy.
Thank you, Ms. Schwarzle-Sutter, for your input. We will talk with a representative from the opposition right now, Steffi Lemke. She is a member of the parliament of the group Die Grüne, and she's also chair of the parliamentary group Free Flowing Rivers. Maybe, Ms. Lemke, you can talk about your work, talk about the group Free Flowing Rivers, and I also have a question to you. So if you actually could get into the position that you govern our country real soon, what would you do to implement the water framework strategy, water framework directive? Thank you very much for your invitation. Warm welcome also on my behalf. And it's a shame that you haven't heard anything about our parliamentary group, Free Flowing Rivers, by now. However, I'm happy to talk about them right now. And of course, this group cannot replace actual committees that work on environmental issues. However, we actually collaborate with representatives from other parties a lot in this parliamentary group. And right now we are trying to write proposal concerning different environmental issues. I hope that we will achieve our goal. It's about the River Oder. It's one of the last free-flowing rivers of Europe, and we want it to remain a free-flowing river. That's basically what the proposal is about. And we hope that this proposal will be accepted before the general elections, because it's a very important topic for us. Another topic that the parliamentary group Free Flowing Rivers have been working on is the River Elbe. So the River Elbe was supposed to be constructed and modified. However, it's becoming more and more clear that the conditions for navigation, but also waterways in Elbe are a problem for the river itself, because the water level in the river is very low right now. That this has negative consequences for its surroundings. So the surrounding areas have suffered from droughts a lot. And it has also affected locations, reservoirs, and ecosystems and UNESCO World Heritage that are located in its surroundings. So our goal is to really stop everything that the Elbe is used for, let's say the waterways, the trade that is on the Elbe. We want it to be a free-flowing river without any barriers, without any negative impacts. And I hope that this will be something that we can work on together. And I also want to comment on Albania because it was mentioned in the chat. Our parliamentary group has also talked about Albania because in the east of Europe, free-flowing rivers are endangered because many hydropower plants are being built at the moment in the East European countries. There's a lot of corruption going on, and this is also something that we have dealt with. However, this is nothing that we can influence directly, of course, as it's not Germany. So what are our plans for the next election period? I want to highlight our proposal here. I can also send it to all of you later. The proposal is very has a lot of pages, and one of our main goals is that drinking water and also water for consumption remains affordable. It's about a lot of details about pollutants also. It's also about wastewater management plans and how they should operate. It's about reducing pesticides and residues that are discharged to groundwater. A concrete example, the current government hasn't managed to actually create riparian stripes that actually work efficiently. So the current minister, Ms. Klöckner, is also being criticized. And what we actually want to achieve, that the common agricultural policies and the funds that are part of the CAP can also be used for purposes such as the water management and water resource management. Thank you, Steffi Lemke. Of course, we can send the proposal out to all participants. If you maybe can tell us the number of the proposal, we can also post it in the chat. However, what I want to do next is pass the mic to Sebastian Schönauer. You are also vice chair of the Bund Association in Bavaria. You have been active for many years in environmental issues, especially when it comes to hydropower regulations and conservation of rivers. Sebastian, what are your expectations? What do you demand when it comes to the right to affordable water, not only drinking water, but also water as an ecosystem? Yeah, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to participate in this webinar. It's actually the fourth part of an online series, and this is something great. I want to comment on what Steffi Lemke said. So you talked about the River Elbe and how you want to stop constructions alongside the Oder. And this is very important. I agree with you. There are billions or millions of European funds that are granted for the constructions alongside the Oder. This is wrong. And the second thing is the River Elbe. What I want to achieve with a new government is that the fact is being acknowledged that if it's not possible for ships to navigate on the river, it's clearly a river that is not that cannot be used for navigation, that shouldn't be used for navigation. So, dear Rita, we think it was very good that the minister, Ms. Svenja Schulze, also engaged in citizens' participation, that she talked to environmental associations. The process wasn't easy. Yeah, I just want to thank you for that initiative. However, concerning the new government, and this is something that I want to say to both of you, it's really about implementing concrete measures. What does that mean? It's about transparency. So we can't let it happen that goals and their implementation are being, or that deadlines for specific implementations are being extended again and again. We need concrete measures to be implemented right now. So I'm talking about water directives and regulations. And this is something that needs to change, because if directives are being changed and modified again and again, if their deadlines are being extended again and again, nothing will happen. Because I think we can't accept that certain institutions take the funds from the EU but don't use it for concrete measures at all. So concerning the Water Framework Directive, there were a lot of guidelines, a lot of regulations that haven't been implemented yet. So the goals haven't been met. And another comment concerning agriculture. So every time when there were lobbyists, parties from the agricultural sector, we that are more focusing on water conservation didn't really stand a chance. For example, when it comes to the nitrate directive, it was a really difficult process. And we are talking about surfaces of 15,000 hectares that are polluted with nitrates from the agriculture. So what I feel like is that a lot of regulations, a lot of decisions are being made to the advantage of the agricultural sector, but not to our advantage, the water conservation sector. Another thing I want to mention is a decision that I thought was really hypocrite. It was a decision that said that the federal lender can decide themselves how they want to implement certain strategies. And I think it's not good that all lender can decide themselves how they want to implement certain measures, because it will have a negative effect. For example, one land can say, well, they're not doing it, they're not implementing it, so we don't feel the need to implement it either. So I really want to highlight here, we need to do our work right now, not only for us, but for the future generations. Let's not just look at ourselves, but let's take a look at our children and, yeah, like I just said, the future generations. Concerning hydropower, there have been a lot of scandals in the last years. We're talking about a lot of money. So we also have to talk about politicians that take decisions which are not good. There have been hydropower plants that were built and the owners receive feed-in tariffs. It's a lot of money that we're talking about. So we can't accept that certain politicians are also involved in private businesses and that they actually profit from regulations, that they profit from hydropower plants, for example. And I believe that all parties must work together in this issue. And I want all parties to acknowledge and actually realize that if hydropower plants are not working effectively, they shouldn't be subsidized. So they shouldn't receive funds. Because really we have to think about rivers here. Every hydropower plant requires one river to be dammed and destructed. And this is something that we have to keep in our minds. Also, if you want a hydropower plant to work efficiently, you need water to flow. And especially in summer when there's less water in the rivers because it's too hot, these hydropower plant owners will demand that water is being directed into the rivers, and this is something that we have to prevent. So I hope that all politicians take this into consideration. Water conservation must be taken into consideration in all decisions. Thank you, Sebastian. So basically what you wanted to say is that water conservation needs to be kept in mind when talking about environmental issues, but also when talking about economy. I would like to ask our two politicians a question. Let's say you are part or working with representatives of the new government. Let's imagine Ms. Klöckner will not be the agricultural minister anymore. Do you see opportunities? Do you see a chance to actually implement the ideas and measures that were just presented? Where do you see room for cooperation? We want to know, let's imagine the CDU is not part of the agriculture minister anymore. What are the opportunities that we have?
I think we have many things in common. The government of the left and the Green Party, we had the agreement, we agreed to exit nuclear power. And I think we have similar opportunities coming up. But apart from the government and the opposition, we also have the Bundesrat that has a certain leeway. We have also the protests on the street, and we see the various articulations of resistance, such as the farmers that ride their tractors in Berlin that have been protesting for weeks on end. So there's a lot of resistance, there's a lot of activity going on. And if we were to work together, there's something that I can see happening. And in Baden-Württemberg, we are currently exploring our options. What might be possible in the area of water protection, nature conservation, protecting biodiversity, and so on. Of course, there's a lot remains to be done, but when it comes to implementing the WFD, we have the Water Management Act, and we have the implementation of the National Water Strategy. So these are different areas where we can work together, I think. On the issue of hydropower plants, we had a hearing. Here in the rural areas, we have also small hydropower plants. But as Mr. Schönauer said, we have to look at what's out there already and what makes sense to, does it make sense to expand that sector, and what kind of effect does it have on energy provision. I think we can also find agreement in this area. Steffi Lemke, what's your assessment of that? Well, regarding what Sebastian Schönauer said on small hydropower plants, Mr. Nüsslein and his negotiations around the 3% threshold, maybe you can give me some more information and send me some more information on that, because I wasn't aware of that fact. I do reject small hydropower plants, you know that, and I think we have an offensive too. We need more action to actually stop the building of these small hydropower plants. This is also backed up by the directive. 25,000 kilometers of rivers are to be restored. That is an initiative. 25,000 kilometers. That is an initiative that we have, and I think we have we see a paradigm shift, because we are now talking in the area of nature conservation and water conservation. We are now talking about restoration projects, and there's a contract, there's a deal being struck between Germany and the Czech Republic on shipping on the Elbe to make sure that the river is deep enough for shipping to take place. And I think it's unacceptable that there is an intrastate agreement between governments on this, which actually leads to the exploitation of water in various regions. Your ministry was involved in that deal, in negotiating that deal, as we discussed in our parliamentary group the other day as well. The motion that I mentioned is very complex. Let me just mention two things. For example, we are saying that the recommendation of the Umweltbundesamt, the Nature Protection Agency, to introduce ceilings on certain pollutants, for example, labeling, adequate labeling, then thresholds for metabolites that don't have any effect in terms of plant protection, and so on. So we have listed many proposals and recommendations, basically, to protect our water. So if you want to make sure that the quality of our water is preserved, and we know that the pressure on the water will only increase. In Saxony-Anhalt, for example, there are no new rights being given to, new licenses being given to agriculture, for example, where there are public debates, and we're just having a public debate. We have to raise awareness for the problem of water, for the issue of water in Germany. Similar to biodiversity and climate crisis, we needed to make this a public topic, a public issue, in order to move things forward. So And we haven't reached that state yet with the discussion on water. So we need to strengthen the public discourse, the public debate on water. We need to scandalize these things, such as small hydropower plants or developing the Elbe River, for example. And also the motions, the proposals, the recommendations, and also the draft legislation, all these areas where we're active in, where we can make sure that we preserve the quality of our water. And we need that public awareness. How much of that we can eventually implement, I don't know. But if during the election campaign, if we can make promises, we will focus on 5 or 6 large issues, and as red lines, basically. So things that have to be met, certain basic requirements for us. I know that this is currently difficult due to structural problems. We don't know how this will impinge on the entire political system after the 26th of September. We don't know how the summer will look like. But in March, we already know that it will be too dry. So we will have a lack of precipitation in March already. Thank you. Well, the conflicts around water being ever scarcer, Tesla, Grünhalde, Coca-Cola, other corporations that are being issued licenses to exploit
Richtlinie würden da schon sehr viel bewirken und den enormen Rückstand Deutschlands bei der Umsetzung der Wasserrahmenrichtlinie dann doch ein bisschen voranbringen.
in an environmentally friendly way, so that economic interests do not prevail. And it seems we were on the German channel. I'm sorry about that. Yes, thank you. I want to respond to what Steffi said. She pointed out that we have to be careful not to miss something. For example, the micropollutants that we discharge into our waterways via the wastewater treatment plants. We need more efforts to make sure that we do not continue with this, that we limit the amount of micropollutants in our waters as well. So who are the polluters? The pharmaceutical industry, the chemical industry, they are causing this, and others as well. Of course, we have to raise public awareness. That is true, because unless we have a public discourse and we scandalize these things, nothing will move, because people are afraid of touching the issues. So Bishop Kreutler from the Amazon was asked to convey his message, and he said that he commended Fridays for Future, the youth, because they make it palpable and they help people understand what is actually at stake. Because unless we understand what is actually happening, then we will not be able to mobilize people. Secondly, I would like to say that if we look at the Balkans and if permissions are not revoked and developments are stopped, that's not possible in the Balkans if we cannot convince politicians that it doesn't make sense also from an energy point of view. But if we cannot basically reveal that all this is a scam, also only for the benefit of private entities and for profit making, basically, then we have a lot to do still. Thirdly, I would like to say our entire water cycle is degraded. That's the sealing that takes place, the developments, and also the way we degrade and pollute our water cycle and our waterways. This is still not being taken seriously. The distribution is not the solution, or redistribution is not the solution. We need to gain a broader understanding of the issue. It is not just the waters and the water quality, it's the entire water cycle. Also, I want to say something regarding groundwater exploitation and Tesla and so on. Governments need support. Governments cannot do it alone to fight against these projects. The public administrations and authorities, they have to do their part as well to make sure that rights are not being violated. In Germany and in Europe, I think we tend to go into the direction of the US companies, completely disregarding and discarding the precautionary principle. But we have to uphold the precautionary principle. For example, giving permissions and for developments and for construction and for building projects have to be revised. There are many municipalities where people are saying we need more sealing and we need more developments, basically. We need to build more. This seems to be a common trend across Germany. I've heard about examples where people said, we have the right to build, we have the right to start new developments and to cause more sealing to happen. But this completely disregards the reality. It's not just about Tesla. It's not just about other big corporations. At national level or at international level, we have to be able to take action at local level as well. We have to be able to resist this kind of mindset and these activities at the local level as well. And I also would like to say one of the major areas where we have to take more action is the common agricultural policy. Fertilizers and many other issues we have to work on that actually are detrimental to our water cycle. We have discussed a lot, we have talked a lot. Thank you for your inputs. Thank you for your contributions regarding these issues, your very detailed contributions in terms of, for example, how to promote water protection, how to make headway in the area of water protection. I hope we can move forward together. The Water Framework Directive, these efforts that are being directed to implement that and to strengthen the Water Framework Directive right now, we have to continue this. And this will be a difficult, a tall task within and among the parliamentary groups. And I think you want to respond, Rita. Yes, we've worked together for a long time, and we talked about all those issues, but for a long time now, we see that one of the major issues is basically our mode of consumption and production. This is what we identified as one of the major issues. The micropollutant strategy and the nitrogen strategy, the hydrogen strategy, that is, we are aware of these things. That's what I'm saying. The environmental impact we have to monitor when it comes to activities such as electric cars and Tesla. So what kind of measures do we have to take as an environment ministry, for example? And I'm saying that is one of the goals has to be, along with SDG 6, but to implement the agenda until 2030. All right. So in that sense, in the same vein, I think we need to implement the goals. We did this with CBD as well, with the Convention on Biological Diversity, but how can we actually implement these goals? With the Water Framework Directive, we have the same question. We need goals, we have indicators, we have the stressors and the stress and the pollution that needs to be assessed, and we have the instruments available to do this. For example, the various stages will not be possible. It will not be possible to implement them in every municipality, in every region, but we have to see what does make sense. How can we alleviate or reduce the pollution and the stress on our ecosystems? It's often easy to point out the reason, point out the root of the problems, but the root cause of all of these problems that we've mentioned is our mode of production and consumption. So we need more awareness in that area as well. So once we have the measures, we introduce the measures to improve in these areas, we need to create more acceptance for these measures. And we see that there are different interests in the society as well. And we have to get beyond our differences to create more acceptance for these measures. Thank you.
That's correct. If you get participants or representatives of every group to discuss, it's always a good thing. However, if one interest group is being heard more than another group, that's also bad again, right? So I think this is something that we face a lot in Germany when it comes to economic interests. There are always people who are against something, there are people who are in favor of something, and then it's really about who gets the fairer, a bigger share, and who is being heard more. So I can't really recall something where we all agreed on. Well, I have to actually mention the nuclear power here, because when it was about transitioning from nuclear power or stepping out, exit from nuclear power, this was something where we could all agree on, right? Well, I also want to highlight two things. One thing that Sebastian Schönauer said, you said that nobody dared to actually challenge the pharmaceutical industry. That's right. But I also want to highlight our proposal again, because we propose a fund, and it's about producers of chemical products, hygienic products, etc. It's a fund where all of these producers and companies have to pay in. And this money is used to actually fund environmentally friendly measures. Another thing that we plan is a wastewater or a water discharge fee, because we believe that this can be an incentive for certain companies to use and consume less water. So this would be something really progressive if we, together with other parties, for example, the SPD, could achieve the implementation of this regulation. So this is something that we've put down in the proposal. We hope that it will be also something that will be established in the coalition contract. I know that we will probably have to discuss a lot on this issue, but I really hope that we can make it happen. Another thing that I want to mention is the hydropower plants in the Eastern European countries. And when we talk about these hydropower plants, it's really about corrupt systems that exist in certain countries, also within the government. However, I think that in Germany, we don't have this case. Something that was frequently asked was the following thing: how can feces be used as fertilizers? That is something that I cannot directly answer now. However, a large part of water consumption is actually due to flushing the toilet, and exiting from the system is extremely difficult. When I renovated a house back in the 90s, I really experienced directly that it's hard to break out of these water cycles. If we really want to stop using fresh water, clean water, drinking water for the flushing of our toilets, we need to actually reinvent and renovate the whole water cycle. I think we've done or achieved some progress, and I hope that we will get to the point where water doesn't seep into the groundwater directly, and that it can be actually temporarily stored in certain layers. This will have a positive effect on plants in urban areas, for example. This is something that we can indeed achieve. However, the thing with the toilets and flushing the toilets is something more difficult. I once went on a business trip to an African country, and in Tanzania, for example, I saw that there were actually toilets built, toilets just like the ones that we have here in Germany. And I thought this was not really good, because we can see that the system, that the toilets that we use here in Germany are not very sustainable. So if it would have been a lot better to actually construct another system, especially in countries where water is even more scarce. So the only thing that helps, in my opinion, is to actually talk about these issues publicly, make them visible, these issues, get the politicians, the government talking about it, because it's really important that it's not only the environmental associations and NGOs that talk about these issues, but really everyone. Thank you, Steffi Lemke. We are approaching the end of our meeting. I would like to ask Sebastian Schönauer to summarize and end this meeting. Okay, so what I consider important is that we continue our dialogue, especially when it comes to implementing measures, when it comes to creating laws. I think we have a great opportunity here. We have a lot of citizens' participation, a lot of groups that are advocating for this issue. So we as from the water conservation movement are kind of optimistic. However, the work must go on. I thought it was really nice that we talked about so many different issues today. We know that it's difficult to actually change laws, change things that have already been implemented. So the best thing would be to prevent certain or specific regulations and measures to actually be put into practice first. A big problem, in my opinion, are certain lobby advocacy groups within the government. And I think it's important to make the connections visible. I think the time has come because there are many people right now who want more transparency, who demand more transparency. And if a politician like Mr. Dobrindt says that if we actually invest more than 100,000 euros in a certain project, we will make it visible, we have to actually talk back and say, no, we want everything to be transparent and visible, not only investments that exceed the ceiling of 100,000 euros. Okay, I want to just add something. I'm not sure if there was maybe a misunderstanding. I hope that we can talk about it again anytime soon, because I think you've been criticizing a lot of things that I want to comment on again. Yeah, I mean, we know each other personally, so you can also message me in private, personally, and we can talk about it later. Okay, perfect. So I have to watch the time a little bit. I think it was a really nice event. We had 2 panels that were really interesting. We've talked with international experts, with national experts. The topic of the right to a safe access to water will remain a relevant topic in the future. And I hope that we will make more progress in the upcoming years. And I think that everyone has understood that we can achieve more success if we all work together. So I want to thank you all for joining this meeting. Thank you. The technicians don't want to add anything. Thank you to all the organizers. Thank you to the interpreters. Thank you to everyone who was involved in organizing and making this event happen. Thank you very much. Have a nice day and talk to you soon.